Hello, everybody. Well, thank you so much for being with us. We have a fun conversation now, getting deep into governance from some of the leaders in crypto who are building out those systems. I'm Sander Lutz. I'm a reporter with Decrypt, and I'm joined by Nneoma Kanu from StableLab, Charles DeHousey of the dYdX Foundation, and Pruitt Martin from Entropy Advisers. Thank you all for being here. I guess to start, just zooming out when it comes to on-chain governance and DAOs, I feel like, like 2021, 2022, there was a time when DAO was the new hot word in crypto. Like it was NFTs, then DAO had its moment. And I remember, every single business you could think of, like if it was entertainment, let's make a studio that's a DAO. Let's DAO it. And there was this notion maybe that DAOs could be for everyone. They could be for any group of people. They'd fit in all cases. I guess it seems like the energy has changed, or maybe it's matured a little bit like we were just talking about. And there are more specific use cases, more specific types of communities or people who might benefit from it. I guess, Nneoma, to start with you, where do you think we're at in this maturity story or journey for on-chain governance? And do you think it's something that you hope everyone might use in every case, or have we learned over time that as it matures, maybe there are more specific places that this is the most effective way to organize a group of people?
Absolutely. I will say the idealized version of DAOs has been really appealing over time, over market cycles. Seeing teams want to actually embody the values of cryptocurrency, which are permissionlessness, decentralization, and wanting to form structures that utilize these very interesting primitives that we have in terms of like social coordination and human coordination. I think that where we are right now, we're seeing that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to governance. There are a lot of challenges that come with organizing in a decentralized fashion. And we're seeing that more specialized small groups of people tend to be more productive when it comes to reaching decentralized consensus in DAOs and protocols and communities. I would love to see more people decentralize decision-making within their organizations. I would love to see more community consensus. I would love to see tools enabling a diverse range of opinions within these communities. But I think that the notion or the saying of too many cooks in the kitchen stands true in this space. And I think that we've seen where folks have rushed to decentralize. They are onboarding tons and tons of community members. And unfortunately, that slows them down. That creates more avenues for bureaucracy within their organization. And I think that's something that we want to steer clear of. But I think that there really is hope in terms of experimentation in governance. I would love to see more experiments. I would love to see different forms of governance and people really diversifying their approach to decision making. And also, yeah.
Charles, jumping off of that, it seems, like a lot of emerging technologies, and also in crypto, there can be this sort of thing where you're kind of reinventing the wheel from the beginning a bit, where at first it's like, let's try true democracy. Let's get everyone in, equal voice. But as Nneoma was just saying, and as people have found out over the course of history, that can be very messy. There's a reason why centralization exists. I guess recently, and speaking about your work at the dYdX Foundation, how do you strike that balance? And what have you found works to be effectively decentralized, to live up to the meaning of that word, but also figure out how to be more efficient in a way that people expect these days in terms of decision making?
That's a great question. I think when projects start, sometimes they kind of rush into decentralization, and they rush into decentralized governance without setting the right foundations for it to be very successful. Usually, the project context evolves very quickly. So I think having a process within a project and within a community to be able to share the context and share the roadmap for all the community, so that everyone knows what will be the topics of discussions, where is essentially the product evolving, what are the topics we agree on, and what topics we will agree to discuss. I think that's very important to set this kind of foundations for governance to be efficient. Otherwise, we very often see people which are coming with high energy and goodwill, but sometimes missing the mark in terms of the context, or maybe sometimes having an interest behind their participation. They want to position their product or position their friends or something like this. So I think some code of conduct is also something which is important, making sure that when people want to be active in the governance, they have a code of conduct available. It can start with a very basic kind of MVP code of conduct, but it should be existing. It's part of creating the foundations of, I think, a roadmap which is public, and people agree that whatever will be discussed will find some kind of alignment and overlap with the product roadmap. A code of conduct on how people should behave with each other and how topics should be discussed. Creating some clear rules also about how this governance would be implementing. So if you have to discuss for how many days, after how many days of discussions, who should trigger the governance vote, for example, how long should be this governance vote, what kind of topic require what kind of quorum. So there is a lot of structurations around the governance, in my opinion, which are very important. And the last thing, which is not always easy to implement, but also give more clarity on how people can be engaged and contributing in a meaningful manner to the governance, is creating some kind of compensation framework. So being able to tell people, if you're very active in the community, if you're like taking one governance conversations and bringing it to the finish line, following the code of conduct, you will bring a service, and we will kind of compensate as a protocol these kind of services. So I don't think we need to reinvent so many things. As you say, there was democracy before, and in Web3 we have many talents, but we don't need to reinvent everything. And I guess we see some of the challenges we see in the real world democracy also surfacing in the crypto democracy, so to say, right? So we should be looking at the best practices. We should be looking at how the real world has been evolving and kind of shaping its democracy to make sure that it stays high velocity and essentially enabling the products and making sure they are successful and keep gaining tractions in their respective markets. Eventually, the governance is here to help the product, in my opinion. The product being the protocol, the decentralized source code and validator sets overall.
Just to jump in real quick on the code of conduct and compensation part, because that's an interesting question that Arbitrum DAO and a lot of other DAOs have been trying to figure out is, what actions should be rewarded for compensation? Is it simply just voting? Is it providing rationale after you have voted? Is it actively contributing to the discussion process pre-proposal? And so that question of compensation is definitely something that has been on a lot of DAOs' minds recently as the space continues to mature. Of, what do professional delegates look like? What should they be compensated for? So I say, like, in today's space, that's one of the questions at kind of the forefront for many DAOs. I was gonna, I don't know if you'll agree with this, but when this notion of DAOs was really new and really hot and people were excited about it, there was this notion in a lot of cases that it would serve like on-chain participation could be part of some perpetually forward-moving engine for people involved in a community. Like, this is, not to be overly, it's like, I could be on my computer forever talking to the people I like about the things I love, and I could, support myself in perpetuity with that. And like, that's obviously a little simplistic. And now you're getting into those realities, and obviously compensation is a huge element of that. But I guess, Pruitt, asking you about your experience with Arbitrum DAO, like creating a sustainable means to compensate people, to keep them engaged, but that works for the organization, right? And isn't like making stuff out of thin air, because that's not realistic. I guess, what's the balance that you've been able to find, or what are the challenges still involved with using rewards as a carrot to keep people involved, but making a way for that to be sustainable for an organization like Arbitrum? Yeah, I think definitely like the idealistic DAO vision from like 2020, 2021 has died a little bit. Now, like, I'll log into my computer today and work at 5 different DAOs and like contribute in some small way and get rewarded, right? As the other panelists mentioned, like it takes a lot of context for a delegate to be up to date on what is happening in a DAO. It's close to a full-time job, and at least what we saw at Entropy was like, maybe our time is better suited focusing on one DAO in particular versus like trying to split our attention across 5. Because we are seeing at least these very large ones like Optimism and Arbitrum, there's so much going on that it really is a full-time job. But then when designing a compensation structure, in order to keep everything, I guess, still open and accessible for anyone, like we want these governance systems to be available to anyone who purchases the ARB token to come in and start participating and voting. That's a key pillar, I think, of this industry, is that accessibility. But if you're going to design a compensation system in an accessible environment, it can be pretty much gamed in a very easily manner. So like if you're going to reward delegates just for simply voting, you're suddenly going to get thousands of bots who vote on every single proposal, and your OpEx costs are going to explode, right? So you have to start deciding like where you're going to draw lines, and that gets very complicated and tricky, I guess, over time. And do you think, I guess, or maybe Nneoma, you wanted to speak, like, has that been solved yet? I mean, obviously, it's these are ongoing questions, but like, it's almost like even though you all work in slightly different contexts, you're almost all looking for the same formula, right? The same balancing of incentives, the same safeguards to just to allow governance to effectively work. How are we there yet at all? Is there a long way to go? Is it still like very hardcore tech experimentation now? Like, how far are we to this being like a novel and effective system that is smooth and that just flat out works?
I will say we're quite a long way from this being there, whatever there is. And I think that part of the work right now is figuring out which controls to tweak to make for the best possible outcome for the stakeholders in each ecosystem. When it comes to delegate rewards, delegate participation, and compensation, I think that where we've seen the most success, of course, we stand on the shoulders of giants like MakerDAO, who pioneered delegate frameworks, delegate incentivization. And I think why they have been so successful despite all the drama is because they've been able to get really specific on the things that delegates should be doing at every point in time, and where they have jurisdiction, where they have power, the types of decisions that they can actually chime in on, and so on. So I think that with every single sort of tenet of a decentralized organization, I think that it's very important to understand that we are still very much in the experimentation stage. Nothing is quite there yet. We have a few frameworks that are constantly evolving. We have different types of governance attacks that we see every day. I think when you participate in a token economy, that automatically becomes a massive vector for attack. And so we see that these roles within DAOs are constantly taking new shapes and forms to be able to adapt to the changing climate. And I think it would be remiss of me to say that we've figured it all out, because crypto moves almost at the speed of light and DAOs sort of follow suit. And yeah, I think it's just really exciting to be in the thick of it, to be solving these hard problems, to have really smart people building the technology to facilitate the work that we're trying to do. I will say between now and like 2020, there's been an explosion of tools that make my life as a governance participant a little bit easier. And as we continue to iterate, as we continue to progress, I think that these tools will continue to advance and mature. And we can see that, potentially there will be a time where there's a lot less frictions and we will just have like an entirely new set of challenges to contend with. And yeah, I'm just here for the ride.
So, oh yeah, go ahead.
Sander, if I may, I just want to reflect a little bit on the title of the panel here. If we want to build a resilient governance, we need to consider governance is part of the product, and I think it is. That might be counterintuitive, but just thinking this is something separated from the protocol and the success of the protocol and success of the product is, in my opinion, a major mistake. is seen from the outside as a whole project. And if your governance is deficient, not well organized enough, your product will lose credibility and will lose trust. And even though we are in the trustless technology, we are all building trust non-stop. We are all coming today to Messari to build an additional layer of trust with people we can shake hands with and everything. So we are in the trust business, and governance should be part of the product and should be structured and managed as a product. This is why having this roadmap, having some clear rules, enables essentially, potentially, and this is, I think, the line of the directions of the journey we should be taking. Governance is part of the product and should be managed as a product.
Well, I think that's very interesting you say that, because I know, just dealing with this as a reporter covering this stuff, sometimes you reach out to a foundation for an organization, they're like, oh no, we have nothing to do with the actual thing. We're the foundation, we're totally separate, don't think of us in the same thought at all, and often, that's for practical reasons, regulatory reasons, etc. But like, do you think there should be more fluid interaction in many cases between the foundation for a product or an organization and the product itself? And you can maybe speak to your own work with dYdX, like, what might that look like? What might be more effective ways to integrate a DAO or an on-chain community with the actual product to make them both better?
dYdX Foundation is active in governance, but not active in a governance as we're not voting, we're not making proposals in any ways, but we are active in bringing context to all the people who wants to participate into the governance itself. There are 2 DAOs within dYdX ecosystem. There is soon a 3rd one. And we've been essentially very public on the blog post of the foundation, essentially giving some topics of discussions, giving some context to the community in general, and bringing some ideas for further discussions. For example, we kind of surface a topic of the treasury management of the protocol being something which should be on the list of conversations of the community. So we've been kind of steering a little bit different topics of conversation. Some of them stick, some of them are left on the side. But we need to be active in governance in that way, making sure, like the same way there is some people for any governments which are active in the elections process and making sure the voters understand and organize the elections, for example. It's a different context and different things for crypto foundations, but we have a role to help the people understanding the framework of what is governance within the product and the success of the protocol, and give them some directions to go and explore. So we've been inviting the community to discuss a Treasury DAO, and this has been taking months, but eventually things have been taking up, and the Treasury DAO has been voted and will be executed in the coming weeks. So I don't think a foundation should remain totally out of it. It should have a clear role with clear rules, but should be active in a way that's surfacing to the community what is important for a successful product and protocol.
I guess just to wrap up, unless Pruitt, if you had a
folks add, I think the governance, it also has to have like some stake to it, and that like governance actually controls what it's voting on. So like, the foundation can be involved and be a guiding hand, but at the end of the day, the stakeholders and the delegates and the people voting need to feel like they're actually making the decisions in the room. So making sure the governance actually, as part of like what you're saying, is part of the product and the protocol, like when it is launched, it actually is real governance. That's super important, I think, for the long term. Otherwise, people realize that they're playing a game and then they get bored.
I was going to ask to wrap up, but it might be too complicated. Like, what one thing, like you were talking about experiments, Nneoma, like one thing on the horizon that excites you, but you'd each have 10 seconds to describe it. So I don't know if we have quite enough time for that.
Okay, I will say really quickly, just because I'm very much into governance experiments, I'm very into the advent or the sort of meeting point of DAOs and AI. I think it'll bring the autonomous aspect really back into DAOs. And I'm also very into the concept of futarchy. So reaching consensus through predictive markets, I think will be really interesting to see.
Charles, real quick, one thing that's exciting you about the future?
I'm very into professionalizations of DAOs and professionalizations of procurement processes in DAOs, making sure we create RFPs, we create competitions, and we bring the best players for each topic. And what I notice, and I think this panel is illustrating this very well, DAOs are getting more and more professionals, and service providers to DAOs are getting more and more professionals and more specialized in different topics. And so I'm very much into much more procurement processes so that the DAOs and the governance becomes run as well as possible. And again, gets very much included into the product itself rather than being on the side.
But second all that, I think professionalizing DAOs, bringing A-tier players into the game is a big focus and something that's exciting.
Lovely. And with that at the buzzer, I think that's it for today. If we could please give our panelists a round of applause for an excellent conversation. Thank you all so much, and see you out there.